And retribution, based on this great foundation beyond its declaration of the sanctity of human life, represents a judgment to which human nature finds solace. It soothes the wounds of the spirit and heals the injuries of the heart. It calms the tempestuous storms of blind anger and the fiery passions of pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah. While some may accept financial compensation for murder or physical injury, there remain souls that cannot find peace except through retribution. In Islam, God's law acknowledges human nature, just as his law in the Torah did by making retribution a source of comfort for the aggrieved. Yet, after providing this just and satisfying recourse, it appeals to the higher sentiments of the human soul, the sentiment of forgiveness and magnanimity, the forgiveness of one who is capable of exacting retribution. But if anyone forgives out of charity, it will atone for him. Whoever forgives retribution voluntarily, whether the forgiveness comes from the avenger of blood in cases of murder, where forgiveness may involve accepting blood money in place of retribution, or waiving both the blood money and retribution altogether, this right belongs to the avenger of blood, for both punishment and pardon are his prerogative, while the ruler still retains the authority to discipline the killer as he deems appropriate. Or whether the forgiveness comes from the victim in cases of bodily injury, whoever forgives thus, his act of charity becomes an expiation for his sins, for God will accept it as such. Indeed, this call to forgiveness and magnanimity, and the linking of one's heart to the hope of God's pardon and mercy, often stirs feelings within those who are otherwise unmoved by financial compensation or even by the act of retribution itself. For what, after all, does the avenger of blood gain by killing the killer? Or what compensation can truly replace the loss of a loved one? Earthly justice, as far as it can go, seeks to establish fairness and secure the cohesion of society, yet there remains within the human soul a void that no earthly measure can fill, a void that can only be soothed by turning the heart toward the recompense that comes from God alone. It is narrated in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad Waqi, reported from Yunus ibn Abi Ishaq, who narrated on the authority of Abu al-Safar, a man from Quraysh broke the tooth of a man from the Ansar, who then sought justice from Muawiyah. Muawiyah said, "We will compensate him." But the Ansari insisted on retribution. Thereupon Muawiyah said, "The matter is in your hands regarding your adversary." At that moment, Abu al-Darda was sitting nearby, and he said, "I heard the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, say, no Muslim suffers an injury to his body and forgives it out of charity, except that God raises him a degree or absolves him of a sin." Hearing this, the Ansari said, "Then I forgive." And thus the man's soul was satisfied and at peace with what no financial compensation from Muawiyah could have achieved. Such is the law of God, who knows his creation, who is aware of the thoughts that stir in their hearts and the emotions that take root in their souls. His laws penetrate the depths of human hearts, bringing them peace, comfort, and tranquility. After presenting this aspect of the Torah, which has now become part of the Quranic law, the discourse concludes with a universal ruling. And those who do not judge by what God has revealed, they are the wrongdoers. The expression here is general, without any specification. Yet the new designation here is that of wrongdoers. This does not mean that the matter is different from what was previously described as disbelief, but rather it adds another dimension to the one who rules by anything other than what God has revealed. Such a person is a disbeliever in that he rejects God's sovereignty, his exclusive right to legislate for his creation, and arrogates to himself the right of divine authority by claiming the right to legislate for others. He is also a wrongdoer, for he imposes upon people a law that is not the law of their sustainer, a law that corrupts their affairs. Beyond this, he is unjust to his own soul, exposing it to ruin and the consequences of disbelief, while also subjecting the lives of others and his own to corruption. This dual judgment, disbelief and wrongdoing, arises because the same subject is addressed by the condition, and those who do not judge by what God has revealed. The second consequence is added to the first, and both refer to the same subject, the general whoever addressed in the condition. The discourse then moves forward, showing the continuity of this general principle in the period following the Torah. "And we sent following in their footsteps, Jesus, son of Mary, confirming that which came before him in the Torah. And we gave him the gospel, wherein is guidance and light and confirmation of what came before it in the Torah, as well as guidance and admonition for the God-conscious. Let the people of the gospel judge by what God has revealed in it, and those who do not judge by what God has revealed, they are the transgressors. God granted Jesus, son of Mary, the gospel as a way of life and a law by which to govern. The gospel itself contained little legislation, only slight modifications to the laws of the Torah. It confirmed the Torah that came before it, adopting its laws except for these minor adjustments. God placed within the gospel guidance and light, guidance and admonition, but for whom? For the God-conscious. The God-conscious are the ones whose hearts are open to the guidance, light and admonition in God's books. They are the ones whose hearts respond to the divine wisdom within these scriptures. As for those whose hearts are hard, coarse and unyielding, they cannot grasp the admonition, nor can they perceive the meanings of the words, the spirit of the guidance or the taste of the faith. They do not benefit from the guidance or the light, neither gaining insight nor responding to its call. The light is present, but only the open heart can perceive it. The guidance exists, but only the yearning soul can follow it. The admonition is there, but only the conscious heart can grasp it. Thus, God made the gospel a source of guidance, light and admonition for the God-conscious. It was a way of life and a law specifically for the people of the gospel. It was not a universal message for all humanity, just as the Torah and all previous scriptures and messengers were meant for specific communities before the advent of the final religion. Only what aligns with the Qur'an's law, such as the law of retribution, remains part of Quranic legislation. The people of the gospel, therefore, were required to judge according to the law that the gospel endorsed from the Torah. Let the people of the gospel judge by what God has revealed in it. The principle remains, judgment must be by what God has revealed, and nothing else. Both the Jews and the Christians were bound by the Torah and the gospel before Islam, and by the Qur'an after Islam. All are part of one divine law, and the final law is the definitive reference. And those who do not judge by what God has revealed, they are the transgressors. Here again, the text is general and unrestricted. The designation of transgressors is added to the prior designations of disbelief and wrongdoing. This does not refer to a new group or a different situation, but rather to an additional characteristic of those who do not judge by what God has revealed. Disbelief arises from rejecting God's sovereignty, wrongdoing from subjecting people to laws other than God's, and transgression from deviating from God's path and following another. These traits are all inherent in the same act and apply fully to its perpetrator. Finally, the discourse arrives at the final message and the ultimate law. This is the message that presents Islam in its final and complete form, as the religion for all humanity with its law meant for all people. It is a law that abrogates all previous laws, establishing itself as the ultimate reference and laying out the divine way for human life until the end of time. It is a comprehensive methodology for life in all its dimensions, encompassing faith, social systems, individual and collective conduct. It was revealed to be implemented not merely to be studied, memorized, or turned into an intellectual pursuit confined to books and records. It was revealed to be followed with precision, leaving nothing to be replaced by another ruling, whether in matters great or small. Anything less is nothing but jahiliyyah and caprice. No justification can be made for compromise in religion under the pretext of uniting people, for had God willed, he would have made all people one community. But God's will is that his law be implemented, and after that, whatever happens among people is left to him. And we have sent down to you the book in truth, confirming what was before it of the scripture and as a guardian over it. So judge between them in accordance with what God has sent down, and do not follow their desires, diverging from the truth that has come to you. For each of you we have made a law and a way. And had God so willed, he would have made you one community, but he has willed it thus to test you in what he has given you. So vie then with one another in good deeds. To God will be your return, all of you, and he will inform you of that wherein you differed. So judge between them in accordance with what God has sent down, and do not follow their desires. And beware of them, lest they lead you astray from some of what God has sent down to you. And if they turn away, then know that God only wills to afflict them for some of their sins. And indeed, many among humankind are rebellious. Do they seek the judgment of Jahiliyyah? But who is better than God in judgment for a people who are certain? Man stands in awe before the luminous clarity of this expression, before the resolute determination it conveys, and the profound caution it embodies against even the faintest whispers of justification for abandoning, be it ever so little, anything of this divine law under any circumstances or conditions. Man stands before all this and wonders, how could it ever occur to a Muslim one who claims to submit to God alone to forsake the entirety of God's law under the pretense of circumstances and exigencies? How could such a person continue to claim adherence to Islam after this total abandonment of God's Sharia? And how can people continue to call themselves Muslims, even as they have cast off the yoke of Islam from their necks, discarding God's law in its entirety, rejecting his sovereignty and forsaking his Sharia, and denying its validity for all times and circumstances, and the necessity of implementing it in every situation and condition? And we have sent down to you the book in truth. The truth manifests itself in the fact that this book originates from the divine being, he alone who possesses the right to lay down laws and impose obligations. The truth is also manifest in its contents, in all that it addresses regarding matters of faith and law, in all that it narrates of past events, and in every directive it conveys, confirming what was before it of the Scripture and as a guardian over it. It is thus the final, perfected expression of God's religion and the ultimate point of reference in all matters of faith and life's ordinances. No modification or alteration is to follow thereafter. Consequently, every divergence must be referred back to this book for resolution, whether the divergence pertains to theological beliefs among the followers of earlier divine revelations, or to the laws which this book has now presented in their ultimate form, or even to disputes among Muslims themselves. The opinions of men hold no value unless they find their basis in this ultimate source of guidance. This truth carries with it its direct implications. So judge between them in accordance with what God has sent down, and do not follow their desires, diverging from the truth that has come to you. The command is initially addressed to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, regarding the disputes of the people of the book who would come to him seeking judgment. Yet it is not limited to this specific context. Rather, it extends to all times, until the end of days, for as long as no new messenger and no new revelation are sent to alter what is in this final repository of truth. This religion has been perfected, and with it God's favor upon the believers has been completed. God has chosen it as a way of life for all humankind. There is no room for any alteration or substitution of its rulings, nor for exchanging any part of its law for another. When God, in his infinite wisdom, deemed this religion perfect for humanity, he knew it would suffice for all people across all times. When he made it the ultimate reference, he knew it would bring about the well-being of all. It suffices for all aspects of human life until the day of judgment. To alter, let alone abandon, any part of this divine system is to deny a truth that is self-evident in the faith, and such denial removes one from its fold, even if one were to claim with 1,000 tongues to be among the Muslims. God knew that many excuses might arise, justifying deviation from his commands, the desires of the ruled and the rulers, or the pretext of circumstances and conditions. But God has warned his prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, twice in these verses against succumbing to the whims of those who seek judgment, and against allowing them to tempt him away from even a part of what God has revealed to him. The most insidious of these temptations is the subtle human inclination toward conciliating the hearts of diverse groups, of accommodating their differing inclinations by making concessions when certain rulings of the Sharia clash with their desires. This may include leaning toward leniency in seemingly minor issues or in matters that might appear on the surface to be non-essential parts of the Sharia. It is narrated that the Jews once proposed to the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that they would pledge their faith to him if he would compromise with them on certain rulings, such as the law of stoning for adultery. This warning was revealed in response to such an offer. Yet, as the context clearly shows, the command is far broader than this particular incident. It addresses situations that arise repeatedly and challenges that the followers of this Sharia will confront in every age. God, in his wisdom, chose to settle this matter unequivocally and to close the doors to any temptation toward compromise, even when such compromise might seem to serve noble purposes, like drawing hearts together or uniting ranks. Thus he said to his prophet that if God had so willed, he could have made all people one community. But he has decreed that each shall have their own way and law, and he has made this a test for them in what he has granted them, be it in religion, in law, or in the gifts of life. Each shall walk their path, and ultimately all shall return to God, who will inform them of the truth and hold them accountable for the way they chose to follow. For each of you we have made a law and a way, and had God so willed, he would have made you one community, but he has willed it thus to test you in what he has given you. So vie then with one another in good deeds. To God will be your return, all of you, and he will inform you of that wherein you differed. In this way, God glorified be he has closed all the gates through which Satan might enter, particularly those that masquerade as pathways to good, to reconciliation, to unity. These oft-used pretexts for compromising on God's Sharia, whether to please all or to preserve what they call unity of ranks, are firmly shut. God's Sharia is too precious, too enduring to be sacrificed for something God himself has decreed will never be: unanimity of hearts and minds. For God has created human beings with diverse inclinations, paths and ways. In his infinite wisdom he has willed that they differ, offering them guidance and leaving them to strive on their respective paths. This is their trial, upon which their ultimate reward or punishment depends when they return to him, the one to whom all shall return. Indeed, it is a hollow and false pretext, a futile attempt to seek to unite people at the expense of God's divine law, or in other words, at the expense of the righteousness and well-being of human life. To deviate from or amend God's law signifies nothing but corruption upon the earth, a departure from the soul's straight path, the negation of justice in human life, and the establishment of servitude of some human beings over others, whereby some assume lordship besides God. This is a great evil and a grievous corruption, one that may never be justified in pursuit of an unfruitful endeavour that cannot succeed. For it contradicts what God has decreed in the very nature of humankind and stands opposed to the wisdom for which he ordained what he ordained. The diversity of ways and paths, inclinations and temperaments. He is the creator and the owner of all matters, the first and the last, unto whom everything shall return and belong. To attempt leniency in even an aspect of God's law for such a purpose appears, in the light of this truthful text whose truthfulness manifests itself in every corner of human reality, a ludicrous endeavour. It finds no justification in reality, no support from God's will, and no acceptance in the heart of a sincere believer who strives only to fulfill the will of God. How strange it is, then, to hear some who call themselves Muslims claim that the application of God's law must be deferred so as not to lose tourists. Indeed, by God, this is what they say. The flow of the discourse returns to affirm and clarify this truth further. The first command, judge between them by what God has revealed and do not follow their desires away from the truth that has come to you, may be understood as forbidding the abandonment of God's entire law in favour of following human whims. But now the warning becomes even more precise and severe, and judge between them by what God has revealed, and do not follow their desires, and beware lest they tempt you away from even part of what God has revealed to you. Here, the admonition is sharper, depicting the matter in its true gravity. It is a trial, a test, that must be met with utmost caution. In this realm, the choice is either to judge entirely by what God has revealed or to succumb to human whims and the temptation against which God warns. The discourse continues to address inner thoughts and doubts, offering reassurance to the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him regarding those who may find this complete adherence to God's law in both minor and major matters unappealing. If they turn away, whether by rejecting Islam as their religion or by refusing to abide by the law of God at that time, when there was still a choice before it became a binding obligation in the realm of Islam, then let them turn away. But if they turn away, then know that God intends to afflict them for some of their sins, and indeed many among humanity are rebellious. Thus, if they turn away, let not their turning trouble you. Do not let it distract you from complete adherence to God's law and his commands. Let not their rejection weaken your resolve or sway you from your stance. For they turn away only because God wills to punish them for some of their sins. It is they who will suffer from their estrangement, not you, nor God's law, nor his religion, nor the Muslim community steadfast in its faith. This is nothing but the nature of humankind. And indeed many among humanity are rebellious. They deviate and stray because that is their way. You have no power over this matter, and God's law bears no blame for their wrongdoing. There is no way to force them to remain steadfast upon the path. Thus all avenues for the devil's whispers into the heart of the believer are closed, and every pretext for abandoning any part of God's law is cut off, regardless of the purpose or circumstance. Then the people are brought to the crossroads of choice. It is either the rule of God or the rule of Jahiliyyah. There is no middle ground between the two, no substitute for God's rule upon the earth, no alternative to the implementation of his law in human life, and no other path for humanity than God's guidance. Otherwise, it is the rule of Jahiliyyah, the law of whim, and the path of servitude to others. Which then do they desire? Do they seek the rule of Jahiliyyah, but who is better than God in judgment for a people of firm faith? The meaning of Jahiliyyah is defined by this verse. Ignorance, as God describes and his Qur'an defines, is the rule of humans over humans. For this is the essence of servitude, the subjugation of some to others, the rejection of God's sustainership, and the acknowledgement, in place of this rejection, of the lordship of some human beings over others. Ignorance, in the light of this verse, is not a period of time, but a condition, a state of being. This state existed yesterday, it exists today, and it will exist tomorrow wherever its characteristics are present. It bears the mark of Jahiliyyah, standing in opposition to Islam and contradicting it. At any time and in any place, people are either governed by God's law, accepting it and submitting to it without deviation, or they are governed by laws made by humans in any of their forms, accepting them and submitting to them. In the latter case, they dwell in Jahiliyyah and follow the religion of those whose laws they obey. They are, under no circumstances, in the religion of God. Whoever does not seek God's judgment seeks the judgment of Jahiliyyah. Whoever rejects God's law accepts the law of Jahiliyyah and lives within its domain. This is the crossroads where God places people, giving them the choice. He then poses a rhetorical question to expose the absurdity of seeking the rule of Jahiliyyah and to affirm the superiority of God's judgment. But who is better than God in judgment for a people of firm faith? Indeed, who is better than God in judgment? Who dares to claim that they can legislate for mankind better than God? What argument could they possibly present in defense of such an audacious claim? Could they claim to know humanity better than the creator of humanity? Could they profess to be more merciful to people than the sustainer of all people? Could they assert that they are more aware of humanity's interests than the God of all creation? Could they allege that when God exalted is he ordained his final law, sent his last messenger, sealed prophethood, and made his Sharia eternal? He was unaware of the changes that would arise, the needs that would emerge, and the circumstances that would occur. Did he fail to account for them in his law because they were hidden from him, only to be discovered by humans in later times? What can those who set aside God's law, replacing it with the laws of Jahiliyyah, claim? Do they place their desires or the desires of a nation or a generation of humanity above the judgment of God and the law of God? What justification can they offer, particularly if they claim to be Muslims, Circumstances, contexts, the reluctance of people, fear of enemies. Was not all of this within God's knowledge when he commanded Muslims to establish his law among themselves, to follow his path, and not to be swayed from even a part of what he revealed? The inadequacy of God's Sharia in addressing emerging needs, changing conditions, or prevailing circumstances. Was this not also within God's knowledge when he issued such stern warnings and commands? A non-Muslim may say what they will, but what can one who claims Islam say of all this and still retain any part of Islam or any connection to it? This is the crossroads where there is no escape from making a choice. There is no room for equivocation or debate here. It is either Islam or Jahiliyyah, faith or disbelief, the rule of God or the rule of Jahiliyyah. And those who do not judge by what God has revealed, they are the disbelievers, the wrongdoers, the rebellious. And those among the ruled who reject God's judgment are not believers. This issue must be clear and decisive in the heart of the believer. It must not waver in its application to the reality of people in any time or place. The believer must embrace this truth and accept its consequences, whether applied to friends or foes. Unless this issue is settled firmly in the believer's heart, their scale of judgment will not be balanced. Their path will not be clear, and they will fail to distinguish between truth and falsehood. They will not take even a single step on the straight path. While it may be excusable for the masses to remain unclear or confused on this matter, it is inexcusable for those who wish to be Muslims and aspire to embody this noble designation. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of one another, and whoever allies himself with them becomes verily one of them. Truly, God does not guide people who are unjust. You will see those whose hearts are diseased, hastening toward them, saying, "We fear that misfortune may befall us." But perhaps God will bring about victory, or some other event of his own making, whereupon they will be smitten with remorse for the thoughts they harbored in their hearts. And those who have attained to faith will say, "Are these the ones who swore by God with their most solemn oaths that they were indeed with you? All their deeds have come to nothing, and now they find themselves among the lost." O you who have attained to faith! Whoever among you turns away from his faith, God will in time bring forth a people whom he loves and who love him, humble toward the believers, mighty against the deniers of the truth. They strive in God's cause and fear not the blame of any blamer. Such is the bounty of God, which he grants to whom he wills. And God is infinite, all-knowing. Your ally is none other than God and his messenger. And those who have attained to faith, those who are steadfast in prayer and give zakah while bowing in humility before him. And whoever allies himself with God, his messenger, and the believers, then indeed it is the party of God that shall prevail. O you who have attained to faith! Do not take as allies those who mock and ridicule your faith, whether they are from among the people of the book who were given revelation before you, or from among those who deny the truth. And remain conscious of God if you are truly believers. When you call to prayer, they take it in mockery and jest, for they are a people who do not reason. Say, "O people of the book, do you find fault with us for no other reason than that we have believed in God and in what has been sent down to us and in what was sent down before us, while most of you are rebellious sinners?" Say, "Shall I tell you of those who will receive an even worse recompense from God? Those whom God has rejected, upon whom his wrath has descended, and whom he has turned into apes and swine, and who worshipped falsehood, such are in the worst place, far astray from the right path. When they come to you, they say, 'We believe,' but they enter with unbelief and depart with it, and God knows well what they conceal. You see many of them rushing towards sin and transgression, and consuming what is unlawful. How vile indeed is what they do! Why do not the rabbis and the learned among them forbid them from uttering sinful words and consuming unlawful gain? How vile indeed is what they practice! The Jews say, "The hand of God is shackled. Shackled are their own hands, and cursed are they for what they have said. Nay, both his hands are outstretched. He bestows as he wills. But what has been sent down to you from your sustainer will surely increase many of them in rebellion and denial of the truth." And so, We have cast among them enmity and hatred until the day of resurrection. Every time they kindle the fire of war, God extinguishes it. And they strive to spread corruption on earth, but God does not love those who spread corruption. If only the people of the book had believed and been conscious of him, we would surely have absolved them of their sins and admitted them into gardens of bliss. If only they had upheld the Torah, the gospel, and what was sent down to them from their sustainer, they would have partaken of sustenance from above and from beneath their feet. Among them are a people who are moderate, but many of them, how evil is what they do. The passages of this lesson reaffirm what we have suggested in the introduction to this surah, that it was not revealed entirely after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in the 6th year after the Hijrah. Rather, many of its sections were likely revealed prior to that, before the expulsion of the Banu Qurayza in the 4th year during the Battle of the Trench, or perhaps even earlier, before the expulsion of the Banu Nadir after the Battle of Uhud, or the Banu Kainuka after the Battle of Badr. These passages reflect events and circumstances within the Muslim community in Medina and refer to situations involving the Jews and the hypocrites, which could only have arisen when the Jews still held power, influence, and authority in Medina. Such conditions could not have existed after their power was broken, the last instance of which was during the case of the Banu Qurayza. The warning against taking the Jews and the Christians as allies, the stern admonition that whoever allies with them becomes one of them, and the reference to those whose hearts are diseased allying themselves with them under the pretext of fearing misfortune, all of this points to a time when the Jews still had influence in Medina. Similarly, the discouragement from allying with those who mock and ridicule the faith, and the mention of their mocking the Muslim call to prayer, could only have occurred when such mocking was a real and pressing issue. These circumstances necessitated such stern warnings, repeated threats, and the exposure of the Jews' schemes and conspiracies in such varied styles. Some reports attribute the revelation of certain verses in this lesson to specific incidents, such as those involving the Banu Kainuka after the Battle of Badr, and the stance of Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, who proclaimed his loyalty to the Jews, saying, "I am a man who fears misfortune. I will not sever my ties with my allies." Even without these reports, a careful consideration of the nature of the verses and their context, when compared with the events of the Prophet's biography and its stages in Medina, suffices to support our earlier hypothesis about the period in which this surah was revealed. These passages illustrate the Quranic method of nurturing the Muslim community and preparing it for the role that God has decreed for it. They highlight the principles upon which this method is based, and the enduring values that the Quran seeks to instill in the Muslim individual and the Muslim community in every age. These principles are not specific to one generation of this ummah. Rather, they are the foundation for the development of the Muslim individual and community in every generation. This Quran educates the Muslim individual to align their loyalty exclusively with their sustainer, his messenger, their faith, and the Muslim community, while demanding a complete separation from any group that does not raise the banner of God, follow the leadership of his messenger, or join the ranks of the party of God. It instills in the believer a deep awareness of their being chosen by God to serve as a veil for his power and as an instrument for the fulfillment of his will in the lives of humankind and the unfolding of history. This choice, with all its responsibilities, is a divine favor, granted by God to whomever he wills. To align oneself with any group other than the Muslim community is to turn away from God's religion, to renounce this great honor, and to forfeit this sublime distinction. This guidance is made clear in the numerous verses of this passage. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of one another, and whoever allies himself with them becomes, verily, one of them. Truly, God does not guide people who are unjust. O you who have attained to faith, whoever among you turns away from his faith, God will in time bring forth a people whom he loves and who love him, humble toward the believers, mighty against the deniers of the truth. They strive in God's cause and fear not the blame of any blamer. Such is the bounty of God which he grants to whom he wills, and God is infinite, all-knowing. Your ally is none other than God and his messenger, and those who have attained to faith, those who are steadfast in prayer and give zakah while bowing in humility before him. And whoever allies himself with God, his messenger, and the believers, then, indeed, it is the party of God that shall prevail. Thus, the Qur'an nurtures the Muslims' awareness of the nature of their enemies and the reality of the struggle that they face. It is, above all, a struggle of faith. Faith is the central issue between the Muslim and all their adversaries, for they oppose the believer primarily because of their faith. This enmity does not subside, for they themselves have deviated from God's religion, and thus they despise all who remain steadfast upon it. Say, O people of the book, do you find fault with us for no other reason than that we have believed in God and in what has been sent down to us and in what was sent down before us, while most of you are rebellious sinners? This, then, is the crux of the matter, the true motive that drives their hostility. The value of this methodology and the significance of these foundational directives are immense. For pure loyalty to God, his messenger, his religion, and to the Muslim community that is established upon these principles, as well as the understanding of the nature of the struggle and the nature of the enemies within it, are critical. They are critical not only in fulfilling the conditions of true faith, but also in the personal development of the believer and in the dynamic organization of the Muslim community. Those who bear the banner of this creed cannot truly be believers in it, nor can they realize their individual worth, nor achieve anything tangible on the earth unless they first sever their emotional ties with all camps that do not raise their banner. Their loyalty must be rendered solely to God, his messenger, and their faithful leadership. Furthermore, they must understand the nature of their enemies, their motives, and the essence of the battle they are engaged in. They must be certain that all their enemies stand united against them, that they are allies to one another in their war against the Muslim community and the Islamic creed alike. The verses in this lesson do not merely unveil the motives of this battle festering in the hearts of the enemies of the Muslim community. Rather, they also expose the nature of these adversaries and the extent of their corruption and deviation. This is so that the believer might clearly perceive the reality of those who oppose him, so that his conscience may be at peace with the battle he is waging, and so that his heart may be fully convinced of the necessity of this struggle, recognizing that there is no escape from it. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies, they are but allies of one another. O you who have attained to faith, do not take as allies those who mock and make jest of your religion, be they from among those who have been given the book before you, or the disbelievers. And remain conscious of God, if you are truly believers. And when you call to prayer, they mock and make jest of it, for they are people who do not understand. And when they come to you, they say, "We believe," but they enter with disbelief and leave with it, and God knows what they conceal. And you see many of them rushing to sin, transgression, and devouring that which is forbidden. Evil indeed is what they do. The Jews have said, "God's hand is shackled. Shackled be their hands, and cursed are they for what they have said. Nay, his hands are outspread. He bestows as he wills. Yet that which has been sent down to you from your sustainer increases many of them in rebellion and disbelief." From these traits of theirs, their positions against the Muslim community, their coalition against it, and their mocking of its religion and its prayer, the believer has no choice but to confront them, his conscience at ease. The verses further affirm the ultimate conclusion of this battle, its outcome, and the value of faith in determining the destinies of nations in this earthly life before the reckoning of the hereafter. And whoever takes God and his messenger and the believers as allies, behold, it is the party of God that shall prevail. If the people of the book would but believe and remain conscious of God, we would absolve them of their sins and admit them into gardens of bliss. And if they had but upheld the Torah and the Gospel and all that was sent down to them from their sustainer, they would have eaten from above them and from beneath their feet. The verses also define the characteristics of the Muslim whom God chooses for his religion. granting them the supreme honor of being selected for this great role. O you who have attained to faith, whoever among you turns away from his religion, God will bring forth a people whom he loves and who love him, humble toward the believers, firm against the disbelievers, striving hard in God's cause, and fearing not the blame of any blamer. Such is God's grace. He grants it to whom he wills, and God is infinite, all-knowing. All these declarations are steps within the divine methodology aimed at shaping the Muslim individual and the Muslim community upon a firm foundation. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are but allies of one another, and whoever allies with them from among you, then he is of them. Truly, God does not guide the wrongdoing people. And you will see those in whose hearts is a disease rushing toward them, saying, we fear that a misfortune may befall us. But it may well be that God will bring about victory or a command from himself, and then they will regret what they concealed within themselves. And those who have attained to faith will say, are these the ones who swore their strongest oaths by God that they were with you? Their deeds have come to nothing, and they have become losers. It is fitting here to clarify the meaning of alliance, walaya, which God has forbidden the believers from forming with the Jews and Christians. This alliance refers to mutual support and alliances of solidarity. It does not pertain to following their religion, for it is far-fetched that any Muslim would incline toward adopting the religion of the Jews or the Christians. Rather, it is the alliance of solidarity and support that was ambiguous to some Muslims, who assumed it permissible due to the intertwining of interests and relationships. Before Islam, and even in the early days of Islam in Medina, such alliances existed between Muslims and certain Jewish groups. However, God forbade this and commanded its annulment once it became clear that no such alliance could endure between Muslims and the Jews of Medina. This meaning is well established in Quranic language. For instance, when speaking of the relationship between Muslims in Medina and those Muslims who had not yet migrated to the abode of Islam, God says, you have no alliance with them whatsoever until they migrate. Naturally, this does not mean religious allegiance, for a Muslim is always a spiritual ally to another Muslim. Rather, it refers to alliances of mutual support and cooperation which cannot exist between the Muslims of the Islamic State and those who have not joined them. This same type of alliance is what these verses categorically forbid between the believers and the Jews and Christians, even though such alliances had existed between them in the early days of Islam in Medina. The tolerance of Islam toward the people of the book is one thing, but forming alliances with them is another. These two, however, are often confused by some Muslims who have not yet fully grasped the essence of this religion or its purpose as a comprehensive, practical movement aimed at establishing a new reality on earth. This reality, shaped by the Islamic worldview, fundamentally differs from all other systems known to humanity. Consequently, it inevitably clashes with opposing ideologies and systems, as well as with human desires, deviations, and rebellion against God's path. This struggle is unavoidable and necessary for the establishment of the new reality that Islam seeks to create through active, dynamic, and constructive movement. Those who fail to recognize this reality often lack a pure understanding of the creed itself, as well as the intelligent awareness of the nature of the struggle and the stance of the people of the book within it. They overlook the clear and unequivocal Quranic guidance on these matters, confusing Islam's call for tolerance in dealings with the people of the book within the Muslim society, where they live as protected citizens, with the exclusive allegiance that belongs only to God, His Messenger, and the Muslim community. They forget the Qur'an's repeated assertions that the people of the book are allies of one another in their war against the Muslim community, that they resent the Muslim for their faith, and that they will not be pleased with the Muslim unless they abandon their religion and follow theirs. Their hostility to Islam and the Muslim community is persistent, with hatred apparent in their speech and even greater malice concealed in their hearts. Thus, while the Muslim is called to tolerance towards the people of the book, they are prohibited from forming alliances of support and solidarity with them. Islam's path to establishing its unique system cannot converge with the path of the people of the book. No matter how much goodwill the Muslim shows, it will never suffice to please them or deter them from uniting against Islam and conspiring against it. It is the height of naivety and heedlessness to imagine that Muslims and the people of the book can walk a shared path toward establishing religion in the face of materialism and atheism. For the people of the book align themselves with materialists and atheists when the battle is against Muslims. This truth is one that fools among us in this age and in every age fail to see. They imagine that we can join hands with the people of the book to stand against atheism and materialism, forgetting the teachings of the Qur'an and the lessons of history. The people of the book are the very ones who said of the polytheists, "These are more rightly guided than the believers." They are the ones who incited the polytheists against the Muslim community in Medina, serving as their shield and ally. They are the same people of the book who waged the Crusades for 200 years, who committed atrocities in Al-Andalus, who displaced Muslim Arabs in Palestine and replaced them with Jews, collaborating in this with materialists and atheists. They are the same people of the book who expel Muslims from Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Algeria and beyond, collaborating in these acts of displacement with atheism, materialism and idolatry in Yugoslavia, China, Turkestan, India and everywhere else. Then there arises among us those who imagine, utterly heedless of the decisive assertions of the Qur'an, that it is possible for us to establish bonds of loyalty and mutual support with the people of the book in order to counter materialistic atheism and defend religion. Such people do not read the Qur'an. And if they do read it, they confuse its message of magnanimity, which is indeed an intrinsic quality of Islam, with a call for allegiance that the Qur'an unequivocally warns against. These individuals do not live with Islam as a vivid reality in their hearts, neither as a creed that God accepts from none but those who embrace it, nor as a dynamic force aimed at reshaping the fabric of life to create a new reality on earth. They fail to see that Islam stands opposed to the enmities of the people of the book today, just as it stood against them in the past, a stance that cannot be altered. For it is the only natural and inevitable position to take. We leave such people to their heedlessness or oblivion concerning the Quranic guidance. But as for us, we must deeply grasp this plain and unequivocal divine directive. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians for allies, they are but allies of one another, and whoever aligns himself with them becomes verily one of them. Truly, God does not guide the wrongdoing folk. This admonition was addressed to the Muslim community in Medina at the time, yet it is simultaneously directed to every Muslim community that arises in any corner of the earth until the Day of Judgment. It speaks to all those who, at any time, are deserving of being called those who have attained to faith. The immediate context for this directive, as it was revealed in Medina, was that the separation between some Muslims and certain people of the book, notably the Jews, was not yet complete or decisive. There still existed ties of allegiance and alliance, economic dealings, and neighbourly relations that had been naturally inherited from the historical, social, and economic conditions of Medina prior to Islam. The Arabs of Medina had lived alongside the Jews in such a manner that these relationships persisted even after the advent of Islam. This environment enabled the Jews to play their part in scheming against this religion and its followers, employing every form of deception and stratagem, a reality that the Quranic verses have repeatedly exposed and detailed. Much of this has already been discussed in the preceding parts of this exegesis, and the present discourse likewise describes some of these plots. The Quran descended to instill in the Muslim a necessary awareness of the battle he faces through his faith, a battle aimed at establishing God's new order in the realm of human existence. It sought to implant within the Muslim's conscience a profound sense of separation from all who do not belong to the Muslim community or stand under its banner, a separation that does not negate moral magnanimity, which is always an attribute of the believer, but rejects allegiance of the heart, which belongs exclusively to God, his messenger, and those who have attained to faith. This awareness and this separation are indispensable for every Muslim in every land and every age. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians for allies. They are but allies of one another. And whoever aligns himself with them becomes verily one of them. Truly, God does not guide the wrongdoing folk. They are but allies of one another. This is an eternal truth that transcends the limits of time, for it arises from the very nature of things. They will never be allies of the Muslim community, neither in any land nor in any era. Centuries upon centuries have passed, affirming the veracity of this timeless declaration. They allied themselves against Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and the Muslim community in Medina. They have allied themselves against one another to oppose the Muslim world in the farthest corners of the earth across all of history. This principle has never been contradicted, not once. Nothing has occurred on this earth except what the noble Qur'an declared in its enduring, descriptive truth, not as an isolated incident, but as a constant reality. The Qur'an's use of the nominal sentence structure, "they are but allies of one another," is not mere linguistic expression. It is a deliberate choice to emphasize this enduring, intrinsic truth. The Qur'an then draws the inevitable conclusion from this fundamental reality. If the Jews and the Christians are allies of one another, then none can ally themselves with them except one who belongs to them. A person who aligns himself with them from within the Muslim ranks thereby removes himself from the Muslim community and divests himself of its defining attribute, Islam, joining instead the ranks of the other camp. For this is the natural, inevitable consequence. And whoever aligns himself with them becomes verily one of them. Such a person wrongs himself, wrongs God's religion, and wrongs the Muslim community. And for this wrong, God places him among the ranks of the Jews and Christians to whom he has pledged his allegiance, depriving him of his guidance and removing him from the Muslim fold. Truly, God does not guide the wrongdoing folk. This was a stern and forceful warning to the Muslim community in Medina. Yet it was not excessive, for the gravity of the matter warranted such severity. Indeed, it is a harsh warning, but it mirrors the stark reality. How could a Muslim grant his allegiance to the Jews and Christians, being but allies of one another, and yet retain his Islam, his faith, and his place within the Muslim ranks, which are defined by allegiance to God, his messenger, and those who have attained to faith? This is the critical juncture, the turning point. How could a Muslim dilute his decisive stance of separation from all who follow a path other than that of Islam, from all who raise any banner other than the banner of Islam, and still hope to contribute meaningfully to the grand Islamic mission? This mission seeks, above all, to establish a unique system on earth that is unlike any other, one that rests upon a conception of life unparalleled by any other, and that stands apart from every existing system. The Muslim's unwavering conviction firm to the point of absolute certainty that his faith is the only faith acceptable to God after the message of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and that the system he is tasked by God to establish is utterly unique and irreplaceable, is what drives him to undertake the arduous task of implementing God's ordained way of life. This conviction enables him to face the immense challenges, bear the relentless burdens, confront the fierce resistance, endure the constant scheming, and persevere through the pain that often seems beyond human capacity. Otherwise, why endure such toil to establish the Islamic system, when alternatives already exist on earth in the form of various manifestations of Jahiliyyah, whether in the polytheism of idol worship, the deviations of the people of the book, or outright atheism? Indeed, why labour to establish the Islamic order if the differences between it and the systems of the people of the book or others are slight, allowing for reconciliation and compromise? Those who seek to blur this decisive separation in the name of tolerance and rapprochement between the so-called heavenly religions misunderstand the very essence of religion and the meaning of tolerance. Religion in God's sight is but one, the final and ultimate religion. Tolerance governs personal interactions. It does not extend to matters of faith or societal systems. Such individuals endeavour to erode the Muslim's firm conviction that God accepts no religion other than Islam, and that he must strive to uphold God's system as represented in Islam without substituting it, amending it, or compromising even a fraction of it. This certainty is what the Qur'an seeks to cultivate when it declares, "Verily, the true religion in the sight of God is Islam, and whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it shall never be accepted of him. And beware lest they tempt you away from even a part of what God has revealed unto you, O you who have attained to faith. Do not take the Jews and the Christians for allies. They are but allies of one another, and whoever aligns himself with them becomes, verily, one of them." The Quran provides the final word on this matter. Let the Muslim remain steadfast, undeterred by the wavering of those who dilute this certainty, and undistracted by their attempts to blur this truth. The Quranic context vividly portrays the situation that prevailed, necessitating its stern warning. And so you see those in whose hearts there is disease rushing eagerly toward them, saying, "We fear lest misfortune befall us." Ibn Jarir narrated, Abu Quraib related to us, saying, Idris told us, saying, "I heard my father narrating from Atiyah ibn Sa'ad, who said, Ubadah ibn al-Samit of the tribe of Banu al-Harith ibn al-Khazraj came to the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and said, O Messenger of God, I have Jewish allies whose numbers are many. But I disavow my alliance with the Jews and pledge my loyalty to God and his messenger." However, Abdullah ibn Ubay, known as the chief of hypocrisy, responded, "But I am a man who fears misfortune. I will not disavow my alliances with my Jewish allies." The messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, then said to Abdullah ibn Ubay, "O Abu al-Hubab, what you have withheld from Ubadah ibn al-Samit in terms of alliance with the Jews is now yours in his place." Abdullah ibn Ubay replied, "I accept." And then God revealed, "O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians for allies." Ibn Jarir also narrated, Hanad told us, saying, Yunus ibn Bukayr told us, narrating from Uthman ibn Abd al-Rahman from al-Zuhri, who said, "When the people of Badr were defeated, the Muslims said to their Jewish allies, 'Embrace Islam before God afflicts you with a day like the day of Badr.'" Malik ibn al-Sayf replied, "You have deluded yourselves because you defeated a small group of Quraysh who knew little of warfare. Had we resolved to confront you with all our might, you would not have stood a chance against us." Then Ubadah ibn al-Samit said, "O Messenger of God, my allies among the Jews are fierce in spirit, well armed and formidable in strength. Yet I disavow my alliance with the Jews and pledge my loyalty solely to God and his messenger." Abdullah ibn Ubay responded, "But I will not disavow my alliance with the Jews, for I am a man who cannot do without them." The messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, then said, "O Abu al-Hubab, what you have envied Ubadah ibn al-Samit for in terms of his alliance with the Jews is now yours in his place." Abdullah ibn Ubay replied, "Then I accept." Muhammad ibn Ishaq narrated, "The first Jewish tribe to break their treaty with the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, were the Banu Kainuka. Asim ibn Umar ibn Qatada told me that the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, besieged them until they surrendered to his judgment. At that point, Abdullah ibn Ubay, when God had granted his messenger power over them, came to him and said, "O Muhammad, treat my allies well." These Jews were allies of the Khazraj. The Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, delayed his response. So Abdullah ibn Ubay repeated, "O Muhammad, treat my allies well." The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, turned away from him. Abdullah then thrust his hand into the collar of the Prophet's coat of mail, and the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, angrily exclaimed, "Release me!" His face was filled with wrath, so much so that those present could see the shadow of his anger. He said, "Woe unto you! Release me!" Abdullah replied, "No, by God, I will not release you until you treat my allies well. They have protected me against the red and the black, that is, all adversaries, and now you would destroy them in a single morning? I am a man who fears misfortune." The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, then said, "They are yours." Muhammad ibn Ishaq also narrated, "My father, Ishaq ibn Yasar, told me, narrating from Ubadah, from Al-Walid ibn Ubadah ibn al-Samit, who said, when the Banu Kainuka fought the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, Abdullah ibn Ubay clung to their cause, while Ubadah ibn al-Samit went to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Ubadah was from the Banu Auf ibn al-Khazraj and had the same alliance with the Jews as Abdullah ibn Ubay, yet he handed them over to the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and disavowed his alliance with them. He said, O Messenger of God, I disavow my alliance with the Jews and pledge my loyalty to God, his Messenger, and the believers. I disavow my alliance with the disbelievers and their loyalties. Thus, regarding him and Abdullah ibn Ubay, the verse was revealed in Surah Al-Ma'idah. O you who have attained to faith, do not take the Jews and the Christians for allies, they are but allies of one another. And whoever aligns himself with God and his Messenger, and those who have attained to faith alone, then it is they who belong to the party of God, and it is they who shall prevail. Imam Ahmad narrated, Qutayba ibn Sa'id told us, saying, Yahya ibn Zakaria ibn Abi Za'idah narrated to us from Muhammad ibn Ishaq, from Al-Zuri, from Uda, from Usama ibn Zayd, who said, I entered with the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, to visit Abdullah ibn Ubay in his illness. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said to him, I had forbidden you from loving the Jews. Abdullah responded, but Asad ibn Zurara hated them, and he died. This narration was also related by Abu Dawud from Muhammad ibn Ishaq. All these reports in their entirety paint a picture of the state of affairs within the Muslim community, a state inherited from the conditions that had prevailed in Medina before Islam, as well as from misconceptions that had not yet been resolved regarding the relationships that could exist between the Muslim community and the Jews. These reports make it clear that there could be no relationship of allegiance or loyalty between them. What is striking is that these accounts all focus on the Jews, with no mention of the Christians in these specific incidents, yet the verse encompasses both Jews and Christians, as it aims to establish an enduring paradigm and a permanent relationship between the Muslim community and all other groups, whether from the people of the book or from the polytheists, as will be further elaborated in this discourse. While the Qur'an acknowledges elsewhere in the same surah the difference in attitude between the Jews and the Christians, you will surely find the most intense in enmity toward the believers to be the Jews and those who associate others with God, and you will surely find the nearest in affection toward the believers to be those who say, we are Christians. This distinction does not alter the Quranic injunction against forming alliances with either group. For this injunction is based on a deeper, immutable principle. The Muslim's loyalty can only be to God, his messenger, and the community of believers. Beyond this, all other groups are equal when it comes to this matter, regardless of their varying stances toward Muslims in certain circumstances. God, in his infinite wisdom, established this firm and uncompromising rule for the Muslim community, knowing all of time past, present and future. Subsequent history has borne out the truth of this divine wisdom. The enmity of the Christians toward Islam and the Muslim community throughout much of the world has not been less than that of the Jews. While there were exceptions, such as the welcoming reception of Islam by the Christians of Arabia and Egypt, the broader Christian world, particularly in the West, has waged relentless war against Islam, harbouring deep hostility and scheming against it as fiercely as the Jews ever did. Even Abyssinia, whose king had once benevolently received the Muslim emigrants and embraced Islam kindly, later became one of Islam's fiercest adversaries, surpassed in animosity only by the Jews. God, in his divine knowledge, was aware of all this. Thus, he laid down this universal rule for the Muslim, regardless of the specific circumstances in which the Qur'an was revealed or the temporary situations that may arise here and there throughout time. To this day, Islam and those who adhere to it, whether truly or nominally, continue to face the flames of war and hostility from Jews and Christians alike, wherever they may be on this earth. God's words remain ever true. They are but allies of one another. And so it is imperative for conscious Muslims to shield themselves with their sustainer's guidance, to heed his command, and to abide by his decisive judgment, severing all ties of allegiance with any camp that does not raise the banner of God and his messenger. Islam demands that a Muslim base all his relationships with others on the foundation of faith. Loyalty and enmity must be rooted solely in belief. Thus, No alliance, no mutual support can exist between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, for they cannot stand together on the same foundation of faith, not even against atheism itself, as some of the naive among us may imagine. How could they, when there is no shared foundation upon which they could unite? Some who neither read the Qur'an nor understand the essence of Islam, and some who are deluded, imagine that all religions are one, just as they imagine that all atheism is one. They believe that religiosity as a whole can unite against atheism, which they see as a common enemy of all faiths. But this is not so in the Islamic worldview, nor in the heart of the Muslim who truly comprehends Islam. Islam is not merely a religion, it is a creed and a movement aimed at establishing a divine system of life. Only those who embrace Islam as both creed and movement can truly taste its essence. In the Islamic conception and the Muslim's consciousness, the matter is clear and unequivocally defined. The religion is Islam. There is no other religion acknowledged or accepted by Islam, for God exalted is He has declared this. He says, "Indeed, the religion in the sight of God is Islam, and also, whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted from him." With the advent of the final message brought by Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, there remains no religion that God is pleased with or accepts from anyone except Islam in the pristine form in which it was revealed through him. That which was accepted of the Christians before the mission of Muhammad is no longer acceptable now. Similarly, what was acceptable of the Jews before the mission of Jesus, peace be upon him, was no longer acceptable after his coming. The presence of Jews and Christians, people of the book, after the mission of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, does not imply that God recognizes their present state of belief or considers them to be adherents of a divine religion. That was a status granted to them prior to the advent of the final messenger. But after his mission, in the Islamic worldview and in the consciousness of the believer, there is no religion other than Islam. This is an unequivocal declaration of the Qur'an, allowing no room for reinterpretation. Islam, however, does not coerce them to abandon their beliefs or compel them to embrace Islam, for there is no compulsion in religion. Yet this does not mean that Islam recognizes what they practice as a religion or sees them as adherents of a true faith. Thus, there is no religious alliance in which Islam stands alongside other faiths against atheism. There is one religion, Islam, and then there is non-religion, which encompasses everything apart from Islam. This non-religion may include a creed that once had a heavenly origin but has since been corrupted. Or it may consist of a pagan creed that remains entrenched in its idolatry, or even outright atheism that rejects all faiths. These all differ among themselves, yet they're all fundamentally at odds with Islam. There can be no alliance or loyalty between them and Islam. The Muslim interacts with the people of the book and is required to treat them kindly, as previously mentioned, so long as they do not harm him in matters of faith. He is permitted to marry chaste women from among them, though there is a jurisprudential debate concerning those who believe in the divinity or sonship of Christ or in the Trinity. Are such individuals classified as people of the book, making marriage permissible, or are they considered idolaters, rendering marriage impermissible? Even with the general permissibility of marriage, kind treatment and lawful union do not signify allegiance or solidarity in matters of faith. Nor do they imply that a Muslim recognizes the religion of the people of the book, after the mission of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as a religion acceptable to God, or that Islam can stand in a common front with them against atheism. Islam came to correct the beliefs of the people of the book, just as it came to correct the beliefs of idolaters and pagans alike. It called them all to Islam, for this is the sole religion that God accepts from all of humanity. When the Jews understood that they were being summoned to Islam, and when it seemed unbearable to them that they should be invited to it, the Qur'an confronted them with the reality that God is indeed inviting them to Islam, and if they turn away, they will be counted among the disbelievers. The Muslim is charged with the duty of inviting the people of the book to Islam, just as he is tasked with inviting atheists and pagans. Yet he is not permitted to coerce anyone, be they from these groups or others, into accepting Islam. For faith cannot take root in hearts through compulsion. Coercion in religion is both prohibited and fruitless. It is illogical for a Muslim to recognize the present beliefs of the people of the book after the mission of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as religions acceptable to God, while simultaneously calling them to Islam. His duty to invite them to Islam is predicated on a single foundation, that he doesn't regard what they practice as religion, but calls them to the true religion. Once this fundamental principle is established, it becomes inconsistent with the Muslim's faith to enter into allegiance or solidarity to aid in the establishment of religion on earth with those who do not adhere to Islam. This issue within Islam is both a matter of creed and a matter of practical organization and movement. As a matter of faith, we believe the matter has been clarified through the preceding explanation and through the unequivocal Quranic texts that reject any allegiance between Muslims and the people of the book. As a matter of organizational and practical movement, the issue is equally clear. If all the Muslims' efforts must be directed toward establishing God's way in life, the methodology laid out by Islam as revealed through Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, with all its details and comprehensive aspects covering every facet of human activity, how can a Muslim collaborate in this effort with someone who does not believe in Islam as a religion, methodology, system and law? How can he join with someone whose efforts are directed toward other goals which, if not outright hostile to Islam, are at the very least not aligned with its objectives? For Islam does not recognize any goal or action not built upon the foundation of faith, no matter how outwardly virtuous it may appear. The deeds of those who disbelieve in their sustainer are like ashes blown away by the wind on a stormy day. Islam charges the Muslim to devote all his efforts to Islam. It is inconceivable that any aspect of the Muslim's daily striving could be separated from Islam. Such an idea is only entertained by those who fail to comprehend the nature of Islam and its comprehensive methodology. It is equally inconceivable that there are areas of life outside this methodology where collaboration with those who oppose Islam or who demand that the Muslim abandon his faith is possible. Indeed, as God has revealed in his book, the Jews and Christians will not be pleased with the Muslim unless he renounces his Islam. This constitutes both a theological and a practical impossibility. The excuse offered by Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, a man in whose heart was a disease for his eagerness to ally with the Jews and his insistence on maintaining their pact, was, "I am a man who fears misfortune." He claimed to fear that calamities might befall them, that hardship might descend, or that adversity might overtake them. This argument is a sign of spiritual sickness and weak faith, for the only true ally is God, and the only true helper is God. To seek aid from others is not only a deviation, but also a futile endeavor. Yet the excuse of Ibn Ubay is the excuse of every hypocrite throughout time. His perception is the perception of every diseased heart that fails to grasp the reality of faith. In contrast, the heart of Ubadah ibn al-Samit recoiled from allegiance to the Jews after witnessing their treachery. Being a heart filled with faith, he renounced his allegiance to them and cast it aside, while Abdullah ibn Ubay clung to it, embraced it, and held tightly to it. These are two divergent paths, born of two distinct perceptions, and reflective of two opposing states of consciousness, one rooted in faith, the other devoid of it. The Qur'an warns those who seek support from the enemies of their faith, conspiring against their own community, and whose hearts are diseased with hypocrisy. It warns them of the coming of God's decisive command or a victory that will expose their hidden duplicity. Perhaps God will bring about a victory or a decision from him, and they will become regretful over what they concealed within themselves. At that moment, be it the conquest of Mecca, or a decisive judgment, or the unfolding of God's decree, those whose hearts were diseased with hypocrisy will feel remorse over their haste to ally with the Jews and Christians, and over the hypocrisy that has now been laid bare. The believers, in turn, will marvel at the hypocrite's state and denounce their duplicity and ultimate loss. And those who believe will say, "Are these the ones who swore by God their strongest oaths that they were with you, Their deeds have been rendered void, and they have become losers. Indeed, God brought victory one day. Intentions were unveiled, deeds were nullified, and groups faced ruin. And we remain upon God's enduring promise that victory will always come, so long as we hold fast to God's rope alone, so long as we devote our loyalty to Him alone, so long as we comprehend God's methodology and build our perceptions and systems upon it, and so long as we engage in the struggle guided by God's light and direction, taking as ally none but God, His messenger, and the believers. As the discourse of the first call to the believers comes to an end, urging them to cease their allegiance to the Jews and Christians, warning them against becoming one with them through such allegiance, and cautioning them lest they turn away from Islam, knowingly or unknowingly the second call is sent forth. It threatens those who turn away from their faith, whether through such allegiance or for any other reason, that they will have no share with God, nor will they hinder God's purpose or harm His religion. For God's religion has defenders and supporters, known to Him in His infinite knowledge. If these ones fall away, God will replace them with others. The features of this chosen band, preserved in God's knowledge, are painted in a beloved and luminous image. The passage clarifies the singular source of allegiance to which the believer must dedicate his loyalty, and it concludes by proclaiming the inevitable outcome of the struggle between the party of God and the opposing factions, an outcome that favors those who devote their loyalty to God, His messenger, and the believers. O you who have attained to faith, if any of you should turn away from his religion, God will bring forth a people whom He loves, and who love Him, humble toward the believers, firm and proud against the disbelievers, striving in the cause of God and fearing no blame from any blamer. This is the bounty of God which He bestows upon whomever He wills, and God is all-embracing, all-knowing. Verily, your ally is none but God and His messenger, and those who have attained to faith, those who establish prayer and give alms while bowing in humility. And whoever allies himself with God, His messenger, and those who have attained to faith, then indeed it is the party of God that will prevail. This warning to those who turn away from their faith, framed in this manner and in this context, initially seeks to link allegiance to the Jews and Christians with apostasy from Islam, particularly after it was previously stated that those who align with them are counted among them, having severed themselves from the Muslim community and joined their ranks. Whoever allies with them is indeed one of them. Thus, this second call in the passage serves as a confirmation and reinforcement of the first. This is further supported by the third call that follows in the same context, which prohibits allegiance to the people of the book and the disbelievers alike, grouping them together in a way that shows that allegiance to the people of the book is akin to allegiance to disbelievers. Islam's distinction in its treatment of the people of the book and other disbelievers pertains to other matters, not to the issue of allegiance. O you who have attained to faith, if any of you should turn away from his religion, God will bring forth a people whom He loves and who love Him, humble toward the believers, firm and proud against the disbelievers, striving in the cause of God, and fearing no blame from any blamer. This is the bounty of God, which He bestows upon whomever He wills, and God is all-embracing, all-knowing. God's choice of the believing band to be the instrument of His will in establishing His religion on earth, in securing its sovereignty over human life, in implementing His guidance in human affairs and systems, in enforcing His law in judgments and conditions, and in bringing about goodness, purity, and growth on earth through this guidance and this law. This choice is nothing but a manifestation of God's grace and bounty. Whoever chooses to reject this grace and deprive themselves of it, so be it. God is self-sufficient, free of need from all creation, and God selects from among His servants those whom He knows are worthy of this great bounty. The image drawn here of this chosen band is one of clear features and luminous, appealing qualities that captivate hearts. God will bring forth a people whom He loves and who love Him. The bond between them and their sustainer is one of mutual love and contentment. Love, that subtle, radiant, and all-encompassing spirit, is what links this band to their loving sustainer. God's love for one of His servants is a reality whose worth can only be grasped by one who knows God as He has described Himself. and by one who feels the resonance of these attributes in their being, their soul, and their consciousness. Indeed, only one who knows the creator of this vast universe and the maker of man, this small being who encapsulates the cosmos, can grasp the magnitude of God's love. Who is God in his majesty, his power, his uniqueness, and his dominion? And who is this servant upon whom God bestows his love? The servant fashioned by his hands glorified is he, while he is the Almighty, the eternal, the first and the last, the manifest and the hidden. A servant's love for his sustainer is likewise a blessing for the servant, one that can only be understood by one who has tasted it. And if God's love for one of his servants is an immense and awe-inspiring reality, then God's grace in guiding the servant to love him and to experience this unique and unparalleled taste of love is an even greater and more overwhelming bounty. If God's love for his servant is beyond what words can describe, then the servant's love for his sustainer is rarely captured adequately by language, except in fleeting moments of the lover's expressions. This is the domain where the genuine mystics of Sufism excelled those few among the many who adorned themselves with the garb of mysticism. The words of Rabia al-Adawiyya continue to convey to my heart the authenticity of her taste of this unique love, as she said, "If only you are pleased, then life's bitterness is sweet, and if you are content, then all people's wrath is meaningless. If what lies between me and you is flourishing, then let all that lies between me and the world be in ruins. If your love is true, then everything is easy, for all that is upon the dust is but dust." This love from the majestic to one of his servants, and from the servant to the gracious bestower, permeates existence and flows through the vastness of creation. It envelops all life and every being, becoming a pervasive atmosphere and a comforting shadow over all existence, represented in that loving and beloved servant. The Islamic conception connects the believer to his sustainer with this wondrous and intimate bond not as a fleeting moment or passing sentiment, but as an essential and inherent element of this conception. Indeed, those who have attained to faith and do righteous deeds, the most merciful will bestow upon them love. Indeed, my sustainer is most merciful, most loving, and he is the forgiving, the loving. And when my servants ask you about me, indeed I am near, I answer the call of the caller when he calls upon me. And those who have attained to faith are most intense in their love for God. Say, if you love God, follow me, and God will love you, and many others. How astonishing, then, that some pass over all this to claim that the Islamic conception is dry and severe, portraying the relationship between God and man as one of compulsion, coercion, punishment, and estrangement. They contrast it with the conception that makes Christ the Son of God and a person of the deity, imagining a bond between God and humanity through this duality. The clarity of the Islamic conception in separating the realities of divinity and servitude does not strip away the tender intimacy between God and his servants. Rather, it is a relationship of mercy as much as it is one of justice, a bond of love as much as it is one of transcendence. It is the complete conception that encompasses all the needs of the human being in their relation to the sustainer of all worlds. And here, in the description of the chosen faithful band of believers entrusted with this religion, comes that wondrous statement, "He loves them and they love him." It releases all its radiant energy into this atmosphere, suffusing the faithful heart with what it so desperately needs as it takes on this arduous burden, fully aware that it is both a privilege and a mark of divine favour, drawing it closer to the one who bestows all blessings. The passage then continues to unveil the remaining characteristics. Humble toward the believers. This humility is born of gentleness, ease and softness. A believer is tender and yielding toward his fellow believers, not harsh, not difficult, but approachable, mild and accommodating. This is the humility spoken of here, the humility of believers toward one another. Yet within this humility, there is no degradation, no abasement. Rather, it is the bond of brotherhood that breaks down barriers, removes pretension, and allows souls to mingle freely, leaving nothing to withhold, nothing to resist. It is the individual's self-centeredness, his self-enclosed sense of superiority that makes him stubborn, unyielding and miserly toward his brother. But when he merges his soul with the souls of the faithful band united with him, he finds nothing to withhold, nothing to resist. What remains within him that could be kept apart from them when they are bound together by God as brothers when he loves them and they love him, and this heavenly love flows among them, shared and multiplied. Dignified toward the disbelievers. Toward the disbelievers, they display dignity, pride, and an unshakable sense of honor. There is a place for these traits, for they are not rooted in personal arrogance or self-exaltation, but in the dignity of faith and the pride of the banner under which they stand when confronting disbelief. It is the confidence that what they hold is the truth, the good, the light, and that their mission is to bring others into its fold, not to submit themselves or their faith to the whims of others, nor to bend themselves to the ways of those who walk in error. It is also the unwavering trust in the ultimate triumph of God's religion over the religion of desire, in the supremacy of God's power over all other forces, and in the victory of God's party over the parties of Jahiliyyah. They are the ones who remain exalted, even in the moments when they face defeat in some battles along the long road. They strive in the path of God and fear not the blame of any blamer. They strive in God's cause to establish His way of life on earth, to proclaim His sovereignty over mankind, and to implement His law in all aspects of life, thereby achieving goodness, righteousness, and growth for all people. This is the defining trait of the faithful band of believers whom God chooses to carry out His will on earth. They strive not for themselves, nor for their tribe, nor for their homeland, nor for their race. They strive solely in the path of God to establish His way, to affirm His sovereignty, to implement His law, and to bring about the good of all humanity through this path. They claim no stake in this endeavour for themselves and seek no portion of its rewards. It is all for God, and it is all in the path of God without partner or rival, and they strive in God's cause, fearing not the blame of any blamer. Why should they fear the reproach of people when they have secured the love of the sustainer of all people? Why should they be held back by the customs, norms and conventions of society, or by the transient values of Jahiliyyah, when they are following the way of God and presenting His way of life to the world? Only those who derive their standards and judgments from the whims of people and who seek their aid and support from the people fear their blame. But as for those who draw their scales of judgment and values from God's standards and who derive their strength and dignity from God's power, they are indifferent to what people may say or do, no matter who they are, no matter what their reality may be, no matter what their civilization, their knowledge or their culture may claim to be. We, on the other hand, often account for what people say and do, for what they possess and uphold, for what they establish as values and standards, because we forget or overlook the ultimate source to which we must return in all judgment and evaluation, the way of God, His law and His rule. For His way alone is truth, and whatever opposes it is falsehood, even if it is upheld by millions upon millions, even if it is endorsed by generations across countless centuries. The value of any custom, tradition, rule or norm is not that it exists, that it is practiced, or that millions adhere to it and base their lives upon it. This is not a standard that the Islamic worldview acknowledges. The value of any custom, tradition, rule or norm lies solely in its alignment with God's way, for only from Him do values and standards truly derive. And so the faithful band strives in God's cause, fearing not the blame of any blamer. This is the hallmark of the chosen believers. Moreover, this divine selection, this mutual love between God and His chosen servants, these qualities that He instills as their defining traits, and this serene trust in God that guides their struggle, all of this is from God's grace. This is God's bounty, which He bestows on whomever He wills, and God is limitless in His bounty, all-knowing. He bestows out of His boundless abundance, and He gives with full knowledge. What vastness lies in this grace by which God chooses those whom He wills with wisdom and precision. God also defines for the believers the sole allegiance that is in harmony with their faith, and He clarifies for them those whom they are to align themselves with. Your ally is none but God, his messenger, and those who believe, those who establish prayer, give zakah, and bow humbly in worship. Thus, allegiance is confined exclusively to these, leaving no room for evasion or misinterpretation, and allowing no opportunity for diluting the Islamic movement or its worldview. It could not have been otherwise, for at its core, as we have said, the matter is one of faith. It is a matter of advancing this faith in action, ensuring that allegiance is purely for God, that trust in Him is absolute, and that Islam is the sole way of life. It is about a clear separation between the Muslim ranks and those who do not adopt Islam as their way of life. This ensures that the Islamic movement retains its seriousness and discipline, with allegiance directed toward a single leadership and a single banner, and solidarity confined to the faithful band because their solidarity is rooted in the methodology derived from their faith. But Islam is not merely a label, a banner, a slogan, or a word uttered by the tongue, nor is it simply an inherited identity, a geographical descriptor, or a title for those who inhabit a certain place. Thus, the passage highlights the essential traits of the true believers. Those who establish prayer give zakah and bow humbly in worship. Among their traits is the establishment of prayer, not merely its performance. Establishing prayer means fulfilling it completely in a manner that produces its intended effects. As God declares, indeed, prayer restrains from immorality and wrongdoing. 29:45. Whoever's prayer does not restrain them from immorality and wrongdoing has not truly established it, for had they done so, it would have restrained them, as God Himself affirms. Another of their traits is giving zakah, fulfilling the rightful due of wealth in obedience to God, with inner contentment and eager willingness. Zakah is not merely a financial obligation, it is also an act of worship, a form of wealth worship, so to speak. This is the unique feature of the Islamic way, which achieves multiple objectives through a single act of devotion, unlike man-made systems that achieve one goal only to neglect others. It is not sufficient for the reformation of society that the community merely takes wealth in the form of a civil tax, or that it seizes wealth from the rich and distributes it among the poor in the name of the state, the people, or some earthly authority. While such measures may achieve a singular objective, the delivery of wealth to those in need, they lack the profound moral and spiritual dimensions that truly elevate human society. Zakat, on the other hand, carries a name and meaning that transcends the mere transfer of wealth. Before anything else, it is purification and growth. It is a purification of the conscience, as it is an act of devotion to God. It is accompanied by a sincere and noble feeling of solidarity with one's impoverished brethren, stemming from the recognition that it is an act of worship for which the giver hopes to receive divine recompense in the hereafter. Moreover, they hope for their wealth to increase in this world through blessings and the divinely guided economic system. As for the recipients, they too are filled with a sense of gratitude, for they recognize that this provision is a favor from God, decreed for them in the wealth of the rich. They do not harbor resentment or envy toward their affluent brethren, for they understand that in an Islamic system, wealth is earned lawfully, without transgressing the rights of others. Thus, in such an environment, the objectives of mere financial taxation are achieved, but within a pure and wholesome atmosphere, an atmosphere of zakat, purification and growth. The payment of zakat is a distinguishing mark of those who believe, affirming that they follow God's law in all aspects of their lives. It is an acknowledgement of God's sovereignty over all their affairs, and this indeed is the essence of Islam. They are humble in their submission to God, as if it were their natural state. This submission is not limited to prayer alone, for the Quranic expression paints a comprehensive and vivid picture of their perpetual devotion. Their most evident trait is this submission by which they are recognized. How profound are the Quranic expressions in conveying such truths in their appropriate contexts. God promises those who believe on account of their trust in Him, their reliance upon Him, and their exclusive loyalty to Him, His messenger, and the believers that they will attain victory and dominance. And whoever allies themselves with God, His messenger, and those who believe, then indeed the party of God shall prevail. This assurance of triumph comes after the declaration of the principle of faith itself, that allegiance belongs to God, His messenger, and the believers alone. It also follows the warning against allying with the Jews and Christians, which is deemed a departure from the Muslim community into the ranks of others, a form of apostasy from the faith. Here the Quran offers a recurring reminder. God desires that the Muslim submits to Islam solely because it is the truth and the ultimate good, not because it brings power or dominance on earth. These victories and dominion are but secondary fruits, granted in their due time to fulfill God's will of establishing this religion in the world. They are not the primary incentive for embracing Islam. The triumph of the Muslims is not for their own selves, their egos, or their personal glory. Rather, it is God's decree, executed through their hands and granted to them for the sake of their faith, not for their personal gain. They are rewarded both for their striving in His cause and for the results that follow, the establishment of God's religion on earth and the subsequent reformation of the world through this establishment. At times, God may promise victory to the believers to strengthen their hearts and free them from the crushing burdens of present realities, burdens that are often overwhelming. When they are certain of the ultimate outcome, their hearts gain courage to endure trials, overcome obstacles, and hope that God's promise to the Muslim community will come to pass at their hands. They are thus rewarded for their struggle, for the establishment of God's religion, and for the transformative consequences that stem from it. The inclusion of this Quranic passage in this context also reflects the state of the Muslim community at that time and its need for such assurances. The mention of the principle that the party of God shall prevail further supports our understanding of the historical circumstances surrounding the revelation of this section of the Surah. Ultimately, this principle emerges for us as a timeless and universal law, unaffected by the constraints of time or place. We can rest assured in its truth, knowing it is one of God's immutable laws. Even if the believing group loses some battles or faces setbacks in specific situations, the unchanging law remains. The party of God shall prevail. God's irrevocable promise is more truthful than the apparent realities of certain moments along the path. Loyalty to God, His messenger, and the believers is the road that leads to the fulfillment of God's promise at the journey's end. The Quranic methodology in this passage takes diverse approaches to warn the believers against allying with those who oppose their faith among the people of the book and the polytheists. It establishes this principle of faith deeply in their hearts, feelings, and minds, a testament to its paramount importance in both Islamic thought and the Islamic movement. Previously, we observed how the first call addressed the believers with a direct prohibition, warning them of God's punishment and the exposure of hypocrites. The second call warned against apostasy through alliances with God's enemies, encouraging instead an allegiance with the chosen group whom God loves and who love Him. It also offered the promise of victory to God's party. Now, in this third call within the same context, the Quran stirs within the believers a sense of zeal for their faith, their worship, and their prayer practices that their enemies take as objects of ridicule and jest. The Quran equates the prohibition of alliance with the people of the book and the disbelievers, tying it to the fear of God and linking adherence to this prohibition with the essence of faith itself. It condemns the deeds of the disbelievers and the people of the book, describing them as devoid of reason. O you who have believed, do not take as allies those who take your religion in ridicule and amusement among those who were given the scripture before you and the disbelievers. And fear God if you are truly believers. And when you call to prayer, they take it in ridicule and amusement. That is because they are a people who do not reason. This evokes a powerful scene that stirs the emotions of any believer who possesses a sense of honor. How could one maintain loyalty to those who mock their faith, their acts of worship, and their prayer? How could allegiance exist between the believers and those who take their sacred moments of standing before their sustainer as a source of amusement and ridicule? Such behavior only stems from a deficiency in intellect, for no sane mind would mock God's religion or the worship of his faithful servants. A sound and upright mind perceives in everything around it signs pointing to the existence and greatness of God, deserving of worship. When intellect becomes corrupt and deviates from its natural course, it fails to recognize these signs and loses its connection to the universe. The entirety of creation testifies to the existence of its Creator, who alone is worthy of devotion and reverence. A sound mind, when upright and whole, perceives the beauty and majesty of worshipping the Sustainer of the universe, and is incapable of making it an object of ridicule or jest. Indeed, this mockery and jesting were perpetrated by the disbelievers, as well as the Jews in particular, among the people of the book, during the period when this Qur'an was being revealed upon the heart of the Messenger of God. Peace and blessings be upon him for the nascent Muslim community of that era. Yet, from the accounts of the Prophet's life, we do not find that such ridicule came from the Christians. However, God exalted is he was laying down eternal principles for the Muslim community, shaping its outlook, its methodology, and its enduring way of life. For God glorified be, he was fully aware of what would transpire over the course of time and through the generations of Muslims. And indeed, here we are today, witnessing that the enemies of this religion and the adversaries of the Muslim community throughout history, yesterday and today, among those who call themselves Christians, have been more numerous than the Jews and the disbelievers combined. These people, like those before them, have declared their enmity towards Islam, stalking it through the centuries with relentless hostility, waging war against it without respite. From the moment Islam clashed with the Roman Empire during the caliphates of Abu Bakr and Umar, may God be pleased with them, it faced unyielding opposition. Then came the Crusades, followed by the Eastern Question, wherein the Crusader nations conspired across the globe to do away with the caliphate. This was succeeded by colonialism, which concealed its Crusader essence beneath a thin veil, occasionally exposing its true nature through slips of the tongue. Then came missionary efforts, which paved the way for colonialism and supported it. And even now, this war continues to rage against every vanguard of Islamic resurgence in any part of the world. These are campaigns in which Jews, Christians, disbelievers, and idolaters all join forces. This Quran was revealed as the eternal book for the Muslim nation to guide it until the day of resurrection. It is the book that shapes its creed, builds its social system, and charts its course of action. And behold, it teaches the believers that their allegiance must be to God, his messenger, and the community of believers alone. It forbids them from aligning themselves with the Jews, Christians, or disbelievers in any way. This prohibition is asserted with decisive finality, presented in a variety of styles to drive the point home. This religion commands its adherents to embody tolerance and to treat the people of the book, and particularly those who call themselves Christians, with kindness. Yet, it forbids allegiance to all of them because tolerance and good conduct are matters of character and behavior, whereas allegiance is a matter of faith and governance. Allegiance means mutual support. It is the bond of solidarity between one group and another. And there can be no solidarity between Muslims and the people of the book, just as there can be none with the disbelievers, for the solidarity of a Muslim is, as we have noted, rooted in faith and in striving to establish God's system and order in the lives of humankind. How then could such solidarity possibly exist between a Muslim and a non-Muslim? On what grounds could it be based? It is a matter of absolute clarity, leaving no room for ambiguity or compromise. God accepts nothing less than firm resolve and unshakable seriousness from the believer when it comes to matters of faith. When the three calls to the believers are completed, the discourse turns to the messenger peace and blessings be upon him, directing him to confront the people of the book. He is instructed to ask them, what grievance do they harbour against the Muslim community? Is it anything other than their faith in God and in that which was revealed to the people of the book, as well as what God has revealed to the Muslims after them? Do they resent them for no reason other than their belief, while the majority of the people of the book themselves are transgressors? This is a confrontation that's both shameful for them and illuminating for the Muslims, exposing the true motivations behind their enmity and the core of their hostility. Say, O people of the book, do you begrudge us for any reason other than that we have believed in God and in what has been revealed to us and in what was revealed before us, while most of you are transgressors? Say, shall I inform you of something worse than that as a recompense before God? It is those whom God has cursed and upon whom his wrath has fallen, those whom he transformed into apes and swine, and those who worshipped falsehood. Such are far worse in rank and further astray from the straight path. This question, which God commands his messenger to pose to the people of the book, is at once a declarative assertion to establish the truth of their actual behavior and an exposure of the real motives driving their antagonism towards the Muslim community and its faith. Simultaneously, it is a reproachful question, denouncing their conduct and condemning the reasons behind it. And in equal measure it serves as an admonition to the Muslims, warning them against any form of allegiance to such people, reinforcing the earlier prohibitions in the three preceding calls, and making the warning abundantly clear. The people of the book, whether in the time of the messenger peace and blessings be upon him or today, harbour resentment against the vanguard of Islamic resurgence for no reason other than their faith in God, in the Qur'an revealed to them, and in what the Qur'an confirms of the scriptures revealed before it. They oppose the Muslims because they are Muslims, not because they are Jews or Christians. For the people of the book are themselves transgressors, having deviated from what God revealed to them. The proof of their transgression and deviation lies in their refusal to believe in the final message, which confirms what remains unaltered from their scriptures, while rejecting their fabrications and distortions, and in their denial of the final messenger, who affirms the truth of all previous messengers and holds them in the highest regard. They wage this relentless war against the Muslims because they are Muslims, and this war has raged unabated for over 14 centuries since the Muslims first established their community in Medina, distinguished by their faith, their independent worldview, and their unique system, all under the guidance of God's singular way. They continue to fan the flames of this war because above all else the Muslims are Muslims. They will not cease their hostilities until they succeed in turning the Muslims away from their faith, so that they cease to be Muslims. For the people of the book, being transgressors, cannot tolerate the upright, steadfast believers among the Muslims. And God exalted is he declares this reality with absolute clarity, saying to his messenger, peace and blessings be upon him in another surah, and never will the Jews or the Christians be pleased with you until you follow their way. And here, in this surah, he commands his messenger to confront the people of the book with the truth of their motives and the foundation of their stance. Say, O people of the book, do you begrudge us for any reason other than that we have believed in God and in what has been revealed to us and in what was revealed before us, while most of you are transgressors? This truth, which God repeatedly affirms in his clear and unerring word, is the very truth that many among the people of the book, and even some who call themselves Muslims, seek to blur, distort, and outright deny in our time under the guise of fostering cooperation among the religious in the face of materialism and atheism, as they claim. The people of the book today strive to obscure and erase this truth because they seek to deceive the inhabitants of lands that are, or once were, Islamic, and to dull the awareness that Islam, in its divinely guided methodology, once instilled in them. For when this awareness was alive and intact, Crusader colonialism could not withstand the Islamic tide, let alone subjugate the Islamic world. After their failure in the open crusades and in overt missionary campaigns, they resorted to the path of deception and seduction. They pretended, and spread the notion among the heirs of the Muslims, that the matter of religion and religious warfare had come to an end, that it was merely a dark chapter in human history. They claimed that the world had since been enlightened and progressed, and that it was no longer permissible, appropriate, or acceptable for conflict to be based on faith. Instead, they argued, the struggles of today revolve solely around material concerns, resources, markets, and exploitation, and thus they insist Muslims, or those who inherit the legacy of Islam, must no longer think of religion nor of conflicts rooted in religion. And when the people of the book, those who occupy the lands of the Muslims, feel assured that their sedative has lulled the Muslims into apathy, and when the matter of faith becomes diluted within their hearts, the colonizers feel safe from the righteous wrath of Muslims' wrath for the sake of God and his religion, a wrath they have never been able to withstand. Once the Muslims are pacified and sedated, the task of conquest becomes easy. Not only do the colonizers win the battle of faith, but with it they secure all that lies beyond: the spoils, the riches, the investments, and the raw materials. Thus they prevail in the material battle after first prevailing in the battle of faith, for the two are closely intertwined. The agents of the people of the book within the Islamic lands, those whom colonialism has installed here and there, either openly or secretly echo the same claims. They are agents, enacting their roles from within the borders of the Muslim world. These agents go so far as to claim that the Crusades themselves were not crusades, and they declare that the Muslims who fought under the banner of faith during those wars were not in fact Muslims, but rather nationalists. Then there is yet another group, naive and deceived, who are called upon by the descendants of the Crusaders in the imperialist West. Come to us, let us unite in allegiance to defend religion against the threat of the atheists. And this naive, deceived group responds to the call, forgetting entirely that these very descendants of the Crusaders have time and again throughout history stood shoulder to shoulder with the atheists whenever the confrontation was against the Muslims. This has been the case for centuries, and it remains so to this day. These descendants of the Crusaders are not concerned with battling materialistic atheism nearly as much as they are concerned with waging war against Islam. For they know well that atheistic materialism is but a fleeting phenomenon, a temporary enemy, whereas Islam is a lasting reality and a permanent foe. Thus, this veiled call for solidarity is but a ploy, an attempt to dilute the awakening that is beginning to stir among the vanguards of the Islamic revival. And while this deception is taking place, the naive and deceived are exploited for their efforts, serving as fuel in the battle against the atheists, since the latter are seen as political enemies of colonialism. Yet, whether it is this group or that, all are united in waging war against Islam and the Muslims. It is a war for which the Muslim has but one effective weapon: the awareness nurtured within him by the upright, divinely guided methodology of God. As for those who are deceived by this charade, or who feign belief in it, imagining that the people of the book are sincere in their calls for solidarity and allegiance to defend religion against atheism, they forget the reality of history, a history spanning 14 centuries, unbroken by exception. They also forget the explicit teachings of their sustainer regarding this very matter, teachings that admit no ambiguity and leave no room for deviation, teachings that inspire the heart with trust in God and certainty in the truth of His word. These individuals selectively cite Quranic verses and prophetic traditions, choosing only those that command Muslims to treat the people of the book with kindness and tolerance in daily interactions and conduct. Yet they deliberately overlook the decisive warnings against aligning with them, the profound insights into their motives, and the clear instructions for the Islamic movement and its organization instructions that strictly forbid mutual support and allegiance. For mutual support and allegiance, in the view of a Muslim, pertains solely to the cause of faith and the establishment of God's order and system in human life. There exists no common ground that could unite a Muslim with the people of the book in matters of his religion, no matter how much the origins of their faiths may align with his own before they were corrupted. For the people of the book harbour no grievance against the Muslim except for his faith. They will not be pleased with him until he abandons this faith, as the sustainer of the worlds has made abundantly clear. These individuals are guilty of fragmenting the Qur'an, tearing it apart, taking from it only what suits their naive and misguided calls, assuming their intentions are innocent and leaving out what does not align with their oblivious or suspicious direction. We would rather listen to the words of God regarding this matter than to the words of the deceived or the deceivers. And God's word, sublime and exalted, is He are decisive, clear and unmistakable. Let us pause briefly at His statement, following His declaration that the root cause of their hostility is the Muslims' faith in God, in what was revealed to them, and in what was revealed before them. He adds another reason, and because most of you are transgressors. Thus, this transgression is part of the cause, for transgression compels its perpetrator to resent the upright. This is a psychological truth, deeply rooted in reality, and it is made clear by this astounding Quranic insight. The one who deviates from the straight path cannot bear the sight of one who adheres to it. The very existence of the upright becomes a constant reminder of his own deviation. It stands before him as a living testimony to his own transgression and waywardness. Hence, he detests the upright and resents their commitment, striving either to drag them along his crooked path or to eliminate them if they prove resistant. This is a universal principle, extending beyond the people of the book's attitude toward the Muslim community in Medina, to encompass the general stance of the people of the book toward Muslims as a whole, and indeed the attitude of every deviant transgressor toward every upright committed group. The perpetual war waged against the righteous in corrupt societies, against the upright in immoral communities, and against the committed in perverse environments is a natural consequence of this principle, vividly depicted by this remarkable Quranic expression. God exalted is He knew that goodness would inevitably provoke the resentment of evil, that truth would inevitably face the enmity of falsehood, that uprightness would inevitably arouse the ire of the corrupt, and that commitment would inevitably incite the hatred of the wayward. He knew that goodness, truth, uprightness and commitment would have to defend themselves, engaging in the inevitable battle against evil, falsehood, corruption and deviation. This is a battle that offers no choice, for truth cannot avoid confronting falsehood, as falsehood will inevitably attack it. Nor can goodness avoid the conflict, for evil will inevitably seek to crush it. What folly, what utter folly for the people of truth, goodness, uprightness, and commitment to imagine that they will be left alone by falsehood, evil, corruption, and deviation. What delusion to think they can avoid the battle, or that reconciliation or compromise is possible. It is far better for them to prepare for the inevitable battle with awareness and readiness than to succumb to delusion and deceit, for if they do, they will surely be devoured without mercy. The Quranic narrative continues, as God exalted is He directs His messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, to confront the people of the book, after exposing their motives and condemning their hostility toward the Muslims. He exposes them further by recounting their old history, their dealings with their sustainer, and the painful punishment that befell them. Say, shall I inform you of something far worse in the sight of God as a recompense? It is those whom God has cursed, and upon whom His wrath has fallen, and of whom He made some into apes and swine, and those who worshipped falsehood. Such people are worse in rank and further astray from the straight path. Here we are confronted with the visage of the Jews and the history of the Jews. They are the ones whom God cursed, upon whom He unleashed His wrath, and of whom He made some into apes and swine. They are the ones who worshipped falsehood. The story of God's curse and wrath upon them is repeated in numerous places in the Qur'an, as is the account of their transformation into apes and swine. As for their worship of falsehood, this requires further explanation, for it holds particular significance in the context of this surah. Falsehood, taghut, is every authority that does not derive its power from God, every system that does not rest upon God's law, and every form of oppression that exceeds rightful bounds. The greatest and most egregious transgression is the usurpation of God's sovereignty, His divinity, and His ultimate authority. This is the very essence of taghut. The people of the book did not literally bow to their rabbis and monks, but they followed their laws while abandoning the law of God. Thus, God branded them as worshippers of these rabbis and monks and declared them to be polytheists. This subtle insight here underscores a profound truth. They worshipped falsehood not through prostration or bowing, but through obedience and submission. Such worship removes a person from the worship of God and the way of his religion. By God the All-Glorious, he directs his messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, to confront the people of the book with their history and the recompense they have earned from God due to that history. It is as though they are but a single generation, for they are of one essence. He instructs him to declare to them the grievous consequences of their deeds. Say, shall I inform you of something worse than this by way of recompense from God? Worse indeed than their enmity and rancour toward the Muslims, and the harm they inflict upon them solely because of their faith. For what is the enmity of feeble mortals compared to the wrath and punishment of God? His judgment upon the people of the book is one of evil and misguidance from the straight way. They are the ones who are worse in station and farthest astray from the even path. The narrative proceeds to further dissuade believers from allying with them, exposing their traits and characteristics after recounting their history and their recompense. The warning and awareness are heightened by unveiling their schemes. The Jews in particular are brought into focus, for the discourse revolves around ongoing events, and much of the mischief stems from the Jews. When they come to you, they say, "We believe," yet they enter with disbelief and they depart with it, and God knows well all that they conceal. And you see many of them rushing into sin and transgression and into devouring what is unlawful. Evil indeed is what they do. Why do the rabbis and the religious scholars not forbid them from uttering sin and devouring what is unlawful? Evil indeed is what they have been doing. And the Jews say, God's hand is shackled. Shackled be their hands, and cursed are they for what they have uttered. Nay, both his hands are outstretched, he bestows as he wills. And what has been revealed to you from your sustainer will surely increase many of them in rebellion and disbelief. And we have cast among them enmity and hatred until the day of resurrection. Every time they kindle a fire for war, God extinguishes it. They strive to spread corruption on earth, but God does not love the corrupters. These are phrases that conjure vivid, moving images and living scenes in the unique, inimitable style of Quranic expression. Across the centuries, the reader of these verses can envision, with the eye of imagination, those people whom the Qur'an describes, particularly the Jews, though it is possible that the reference may also include some of the hypocrites in Medina. These individuals are depicted coming to the Muslims declaring, "We believe," while harbouring disbelief in their hearts. They carry it with them as they enter and as they leave, though their tongues utter words that belie the hidden disbelief they conceal, both coming and going. It is likely that they include those Jews who plotted confusion, saying to one another, "Believe in this Qur'an at the beginning of the day and reject it at the end of it so that they might turn back." That is, so that the Muslims might abandon their faith due to this deliberate sowing of doubt and malicious deception. And God knows well all that they conceal. God himself declares this, for it is the ultimate truth. This statement also serves to reassure the believers of their sustainer's protection and preservation against the schemes of their enemies, as well as to affirm his complete awareness of their hidden plots. Furthermore, it is a warning to those engaged in such schemes, urging them to desist. The narrative continues, portraying their actions as though they are visible, observable movements. And you see many of them rushing into sin and transgression and into devouring what is unlawful. Evil indeed is what they do. The word rushing evokes an image of them competing with one another in sin, transgression, and the consumption of unlawful gains. This image is crafted to condemn and denounce their behaviour, yet it also reflects a state of being that overtakes individuals and communities when corruption spreads, values collapse, and evil prevails. When one looks at societies that have descended into such a state, one perceives them as though all their members, strong and weak alike, are racing toward evil, sin and transgression. In such degenerate and corrupt societies, sin and transgression are not the exclusive domain of the strong. Even the weak partake in them. Weak individuals may not have the power to oppress the strong, but they oppress one another and violate the sanctities of God. In these corrupt societies, the sacred boundaries established by God become unprotected sanctuaries, unguarded by either rulers or the ruled. Sin and transgression become the defining features of such societies, and their rush to indulge in them becomes their collective activity. Such was the state of the Jewish community in those days. And likewise, their devouring of the unlawful for consuming what is unlawful is another hallmark of the Jews in every age. Evil indeed is what they do. The discourse then points to yet another trait of corrupt societies: the silence of their religious leaders and scholars regarding the rampant sin, transgression, and consumption of unlawful gains. The Qur'an rebukes the rabbis and scholars for failing to fulfill their duty to prevent such evil. Why do the rabbis and the religious scholars not forbid them from uttering sin and devouring what is unlawful? Evil indeed is what they have been doing. This silence, the failure of those entrusted with upholding the law and religious knowledge to denounce the sins and transgressions of their society, is a characteristic of communities that have fallen into moral decay and are on the brink of ruin. The Quran has described the children of Israel as they would not prevent one another from committing sins that they committed. This is a fundamental distinction between a virtuous, thriving and cohesive society and one that is corrupt and decayed. A virtuous society upholds the principle of enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong. It includes individuals who command what is good and forbid what is evil, and others who heed these commands and prohibitions. The moral fabric of such a society is strong enough that those who deviate from its norms dare not openly defy this principle, nor harm those who enjoin good and forbid evil. Thus has God described the Muslim community: "You are the best community ever raised for humanity. You enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong, and believe in God." And thus has he described the children of Israel: "They would not prevent one another from committing sins that they committed." This distinction is a decisive criterion between the two communities and the two groups. Here, however, the Quran lays the blame squarely upon the rabbis and religious scholars who remain silent regarding the rush to sin, transgression, and the consumption of unlawful gains. They fail to fulfill the trust they were given to preserve the Book of God. This is a warning call to all adherents of religion. The righteousness or corruption of a society hinges upon whether those entrusted with safeguarding its religious and moral order fulfill their duty to enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. As has been said before in Fi Zilal al-Quran, this duty requires authority, an authority that commands and forbids. For enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong is not merely an act of invitation or exposition, it requires power and enforcement. The call to virtue may be a matter of explanation, but the command and prohibition require authority. Thus, those who enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong must possess the authority necessary to give weight to their commands and prohibitions within society, so that their words do not remain mere speech, devoid of consequence. And, as an example of the most grotesque forms of sinful utterances, the Quran recounts the foolish and vile statement of the Jews. The Jews say, "God's hand is shackled. Shackled be their hands, and cursed are they for what they have said. Nay, both his hands are outstretched, he bestows as he wills." This reflects the distorted and perverse conception the Jews held of God. Exalted is he. The Quran has conveyed many of their misguided notions, such as when they arrogantly declared God is poor and we are rich, when asked to give in charity. And here they say God's hand is shackled, using this blasphemous claim to justify their own miserliness. In their false assumption, God, may he be glorified above what they ascribe to him, gives sparingly, if at all, and thus they see no reason why they should give generously. Their coarseness and hardness of heart are so severe that they did not even articulate their false claim of God's supposed miserliness in direct terms, but chose instead an even more insolent and brazen expression, saying, "God's hand is shackled." The Quran responds to them by turning their words back upon them, affirming this shackling upon their own hands, cursing them and banishing them from God's mercy as recompense for their outrageous claim. Shackled be their hands, and cursed are they for what they have said. And so they were indeed. They are the most miserly of God's creation with their wealth. Then the Qur'an corrects their distorted and corrupt conception, describing God, the most generous, as he truly is, one who bestows boundlessly upon his servants without measure. Nay, both his hands are outstretched, he bestows as he wills. God's bounties, which are limitless and unceasing, are evident to all creation. His blessings, which never diminish nor run dry, bear witness to his open-handedness and overwhelming grace. These blessings proclaim his generosity in every language, but the Jews fail to see them, for their hearts are preoccupied with hoarding and grasping. They are engrossed in ingratitude, consumed by denial, and even their speech about God is laced with insolence and profanity. God, exalted is he, informs his messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, of what will emerge from this people, and what will befall them due to their envy and spite. Their resentment stems from God's choosing him as his messenger, and from the exposure of their ancient and ongoing deeds by the light of this revelation. Indeed, what has been revealed to you from your sustainer will surely increase many of them in rebellion and disbelief. It is their envy and spite, as well as the unveiling of their true nature in what God has revealed to his messenger, that will drive many of them to greater rebellion and disbelief. Having rejected faith, they will inevitably plunge further into their opposition, increasing in arrogance, denial, rebellion, and disbelief. Thus, the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, becomes a mercy for the believers, but a source of woe for the deniers. God then informs his messenger of what he has decreed for them: mutual enmity and hatred among themselves, the futility of their schemes even at the height of their plotting, and their ultimate failure in any war they wage against the Muslim community. We have cast among them enmity and hatred until the day of resurrection. Every time they kindle the fire of war, God extinguishes it. To this day, the factions of the Jews remain divided and antagonistic toward one another. Though in this current period it may appear that global Jewry stands united, fanning the flames of war against Muslim lands and achieving temporary success, we must not judge by a brief span of time or by appearances that fail to encompass the whole truth. Over the course of 1,300 years, even before the advent of Islam, the Jews have lived in mutual enmity, disgrace and dispersion. Their ultimate fate will return to what it has always been, regardless of the alliances that seem to form around them. But the key to the entire situation lies in the existence of a believing community, a nusba mumina that fulfills God's promise, becoming the instrument of his decree. Where is this believing community today, the one that will take hold of God's promise, stand as the veil through which his will manifests, and establish his decree on earth? The day the Muslim Ummah returns to true Islam, believing in it as it is meant to be believed in, and establishing their entire way of life upon its methodology and law, that day God's promise will be fulfilled against the most wicked of his creation. The Jews are well aware of this, and thus they unleash all their arsenal of evil and scheming, pouring out the full measure of their power, cruelty and destruction upon the vanguards of the Islamic revival wherever they emerge. These strikes, though delivered not by their own hands but by the hands of their agents, are vicious and merciless, showing no regard for ties of kinship or covenant. Yet God's will prevails, and his promise will inevitably come to pass. We have cast among them enmity and hatred until the day of resurrection. Every time they kindle the fire of war, God extinguishes it. Indeed, this evil and corruption embodied by the Jews will inevitably be confronted by those whom God raises to stop and crush it. For God does not love corruption on earth, and whatever God does not love, he will surely send his servants to remove and obliterate. They strive to spread corruption on earth, but God does not love the corrupters. At the end of this lesson, the Quran presents a great foundational principle of faith. The establishment of God's religion on earth results in well-being, prosperity, and success for the believers in both this world and the hereafter. There is no separation between religion and worldly life, nor between worldly life and the hereafter. It is a single, unified methodology for both realms, for this life and for faith, for this world and for the eternal life to come. This great principle of faith is presented in the context of the deviation of the people of the book from God's religion, their consumption of what is unlawful, and their distortion of God's words to gain fleeting benefits of this earthly life. Following God's way would have been far better for them, both in this world and the hereafter, had they chosen to tread the right path. If only the people of the book had believed and been mindful of God, we would surely have absolved them of their sins and admitted them to gardens of bliss. And if they had upheld the Torah and the Gospel and what was revealed to them from their sustainer, they would surely have been nourished from above them and from beneath their feet. Among them is a moderate community, but many of them evil indeed is what they do. These two verses articulate a profound principle of the Islamic worldview, representing an immense truth of human existence. The need to clarify this principle and illuminate this truth has never been as urgent as it is today, as human reason, values and systems flounder and falter amidst the fog of distorted perceptions and misguided methodologies in the face of this grave matter. God, exalted is He, tells the people of the book, and this statement applies equally to all who follow Scripture, that if they had believed and been mindful of Him, He would have absolved them of their sins and admitted them to gardens of bliss. This is their reward in the hereafter. Furthermore, if they had implemented in their worldly lives the divine methodology embodied in the Torah and the Gospel, and in the teachings revealed to them by God, unaltered and uncorrupted, their worldly lives would have flourished. Their existence would have been righteous, their provisions abundant, and they would have been nourished from above them and beneath their feet with the blessings of wealth, production, fair distribution, and the rectitude of their affairs. But they neither believe nor are mindful, nor do they uphold God's way, except for a small, moderate group among them who have not gone to extremes in their deviation. As for the majority of them, evil indeed is what they do. Thus it becomes clear from the two verses that faith, piety, and the realization of God's way in the actual life of humanity in this transient world do not merely guarantee their followers the reward of the hereafter, though this is the foremost and most lasting reward, but also ensure the rectitude of worldly affairs, granting those who adhere to it the blessings of this world: abundance, growth, equitable distribution, and sufficiency. This reality is painted in vivid, tangible terms, illustrating the concept of abundance and overflow in the divine words. They would have eaten from above them and from beneath their feet. It thus becomes evident that there is no separate path for attaining the reward of the hereafter, and another distinct path for the rectitude of life in this world. There is only one path by which both are attained, the path of faith, piety, and the implementation of God's divine way in worldly life. If this path is abandoned, the world itself becomes corrupt, and the hereafter is irretrievably lost. This singular path is the way of faith, piety, and the realization of the divine methodology in the affairs of this world. This methodology is not merely one of belief, faith, spiritual feeling, or piety of the heart. Rather, it is also, and consequently, a practical, realistic methodology for human life, upon which life itself is established. Its establishment, accompanied by faith and piety, is what ensures the rectitude of life on earth, the flow of sustenance, the abundance of production, and the equitable distribution of resources, such that all people, under this methodology, eat from above them and from beneath their feet. The faith-based methodology of life does not make religion a substitute for the world, nor does it make the happiness of the hereafter a replacement for happiness in this life. Neither does it set the path of the hereafter apart from the path of this world. This is the truth that has become obscured in the thoughts, minds, consciences, and realities of people today. The paths of this world and the paths of the hereafter have diverged in the thinking, conscience, and reality of people. So much so that the average individual and the prevailing thought in this misguided humanity does not see any possibility of the two paths converging. On the contrary, it is commonly perceived that one must either choose the path of this world and neglect the hereafter, or choose the path of the hereafter and disregard the world. There appears to be no way to unite the two, either in conception or in reality. This has been reinforced by the state of the world, people, and their conditions in this particular period of time. Indeed, the conditions of today's misguided, godless life, estranged from God and his methodology, widen the chasm between the path of this world and the path of the hereafter. They compel those who wish to rise within society or succeed in the arena of worldly gains to abandon the path of the hereafter, to sacrifice religious guidance, moral ideals, elevated perceptions, and upright conduct, all of which religion enjoins. At the same time, they compel those who seek salvation in the hereafter to avoid the current of life's corrupt conditions and the means by which individuals, under such conditions, achieve prominence and success in the pursuit of worldly gains. For these means cannot be clean, cannot align with religion or morality, and certainly cannot earn God's pleasure. But is this a necessary and inescapable fate? Is there truly no way to reconcile the path of this world with the path of the hereafter? Is this miserable condition an unavoidable reality? No, it is not an inevitable fate. The enmity between this world and the hereafter, the divergence between the path of this world and the path of the hereafter, is not an unchangeable truth. Indeed, it is not inherent to the nature of life itself. It is merely an incidental distortion, a deviation from the true course. The innate nature of human life is for the path of this world and the path of the hereafter to converge. The path to rectitude in the hereafter is, in essence, the same path to rectitude in this world. The toil of the earth, its production and its abundance, are the very means that qualify one for the reward of the hereafter, just as they are the means for prosperity in this worldly life. Faith, piety, and righteous action are the causes that lead to the flourishing of this earth, just as they are the means of attaining God's pleasure and reward in the hereafter. This is the original nature of human life. But this original nature can only be realized when life is established upon God's methodology, which he has ordained for humanity. For this methodology is what turns work into worship. It is what makes stewardship over the earth, in accordance with God's law, an obligation. And stewardship entails labour, production, abundance, growth and justice in distribution, resulting in sustenance overflowing upon all, from above them and from beneath their feet, as expressed in the noble Qur'an. The Islamic worldview portrays humanity's function on earth as stewardship on behalf of God, by his leave and in accordance with his conditions. Thus, productive labour and ensuring prosperity through the utilization of all the earth's resources, indeed, even the resources of the universe, represent the fulfillment of this stewardship. When humanity fulfills this function according to God's methodology and law, as required by the conditions of stewardship, this becomes an act of obedience to God, for which the servant is rewarded in the hereafter. At the same time, by fulfilling this function in this manner, humanity reaps the blessings of the earth, which God has subjected to them. They receive sustenance overflowing from above them and from beneath their feet, as the Quran beautifully depicts. In the Islamic conception, humanity is deemed disobedient to God if it fails to unlock the resources of the earth and to harness the powers of the universe, which God has subjected to them. Such a failure would represent a neglect of the very purpose for which God created humanity, as he declares to the angels, "Indeed, I will place upon the earth a vicegerent," and as he also declares to humanity, "And he has subjected to you whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth, all from him." To neglect this is to squander the provision God has granted his servants, thereby losing both the hereafter and the world. Thus, the Islamic methodology unites work for this world and work for the hereafter in perfect harmony and balance. It does not deprive a person of this world in pursuit of the hereafter, nor does it deprive them of the hereafter in pursuit of this world. In the Islamic worldview, the two are neither opposites nor alternatives. This is true for humanity as a whole, as well as for the communities that establish themselves on God's methodology. It is also true for individuals, for the path of the individual and the path of the community are aligned and harmonious in the Islamic framework. The methodology requires the individual to exert their utmost physical and intellectual effort in labour and production, seeking God's pleasure through their work. It forbids them from wrongdoing, betrayal, deceit, or consuming what is unlawful. It also forbids them from withholding anything they own from their needy brethren in the community. while fully recognizing their right to individual ownership of the fruits of their labor and the community's right to their wealth within the limits set by God's laws. Within these bounds and considerations, the individual's labor is recorded as worship to God, for which they are rewarded with blessings in this world and paradise in the hereafter.